Ask the Dean episode. I don't even know. Was it 111?
111.
111. Ask Mapped now. I don't even know what the heck show we call this anymore. I am Dr. Ryan Gray, your host here. Co-host, host, moderator, MC, whatever you want to call me. I don't care. If you don't know who I am, I started a website 10 plus years ago now called medicalschoolhq.net and started my first podcast, The Premed Years, shortly thereafter. And I was lucky enough a couple years ago to meet the wonderful Rachel Grubbs, and we co-founded Mappd together. So Rachel Grubbs, welcome. Thank you for joining me today. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great. I love Wednesdays, especially when I have snacks handy.
Snacks are good.
But yeah, Ask the Dean is always one of the highlights of my week.
Wonderful, wonderful. Lots of experience in the MCAT test prep and pre-med world, sharing your expertise. Thank you for being here. Dr. Scott writes, the man that needs no introduction, the man that needs no hairbrush, the former director of admissions at UT Southwestern, retired executive director at TMDSAS. How you doing, my friend?
Doing well. We're making it in the heat here in Austin, Texas, and you just keep trucking along. We had the hottest July ever recorded in Austin this year.
Climate change. Close your eyes.
It was 100 degrees or more every day of July.
Wow. Well, I will be in Dallas at the end of August, so hopefully it cools off a little bit by then. But I know,
and I think I'm going to try to come up there and see you. Right?
I hope so. I know your boy Enrique is going to be there, trying to be there with his TMDSAS team as well. Learn about how to podcast better. That's the goal. Yeah. That's the goal. And our newest advisor, Courtney Lewis, straight from Burrell College of Osteopathic Medicine as their director of admissions. Courtney, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm the woman that does need an introduction. So
yes.
Thank you for doing that.
For now. Although I think that will change very shortly as we continue to expose you to more students, and they'll be like, oh my gosh, we want more of Courtney, which is already happening. So we are here to answer your questions. Go to mappd.tv. mappd.tv to ask your questions. We'll bring them up. We'll answer them to the best of our ability and hopefully give you some motivation, some encouragement, some information to guide you on your path. So let's rock and roll. JJ, hello. Thanks for doing this. My question is about the ACOMAS experience section. It says to write, quote, description/key responsibilities. Do you still recommend storytelling for these descriptions? So here's where there may be some conflict among us. It'll be interesting to see what Courtney says. I'm a big fan of anecdotes with 600 characters that you get. Why is that a question of with the 600 characters that you get for ACOMAS? There is an opportunity for a little anecdote to show some impact, to show who you are. And you still need to show a little bit about the position and some reflection on that position, which I think a lot of people take my storytelling what's the word I'm trying to think of? My storytelling recommendation a little bit too far, and then they don't leave room for reflection or anything else. Courtney, as the former director of admissions at an osteopathic school that used ACOMAS, 600 characters, what are your thoughts on that experience section? How do students best utilize that area?
No, I agree with you. I think you're right. It's an opportunity to, make sure you have reflections in there, put a brief description of what you did. But I do think that there is opportunity to kind of show us what was gleaned out of it and storytell just a bit on the experience itself. So I'm on board. I align with you on that.
Woohoo! Yeah, it just seems like it's so obvious to me that you get 10,000 applications. You don't need to read 10,000 activity descriptions of everyone who was a scribe saying, as a scribe, I did XYZ. As a scribe, here is the impact that I had on the patients and how I increased patient flow and productivity and blah, blah, blah. Like, that's the obvious stuff. I need to go further than that. I need to see you in that. And so to me, that's just so obvious that it's like, why is that not standard accepted practice? But not everyone agrees, and that's okay. Not everyone is right like me all the time. And next question. Raquel, how does one write a letter of intent? Dr. Wright, let's talk about writing. This one's meant for you, right?
Yeah.
So let's first talk about what is the goal of a letter of intent, and should one be sent? And then let's talk about how to write one.
Yeah, I think there is a time and a place for a letter of intent. I think that medical schools, when they're making admissions offers, particularly as later in the cycle, it is nice to know that a student is still interested, that they're still engaged in wanting to come to your school, et cetera. And so I think a letter of intent can be productive at that point. I always say that a letter, regardless of what it is, to a medical school, or an email, we should say, potentially say, should be short, to the point. Don't go on and on. I've seen a letter of intent that was 2 pages long, single spaced, and they went into so many details about the school and what attracts them to the school, and that's nice. You can do that, but in a short way. I think it needs to be short, to the point. I still am interested in your school. If you make me an offer, I will come. That kind of letter in their file can be helpful to know, what their intentions are. Now, if you're sending a letter of intent to every school that you're on their waiting list, or you're sending in to every school that you applied to, then that begs the question, really, what is your intent here? Your intent is to get in somewhere. So for you to say then, I would really love to come to XYZ medical school for these reasons, there can be an ethical, sort of dilemma there. But in the situation where you're on several waiting lists and you are interested and or whatever, then I think it's appropriate. It just needs to be short, to the point.
Yeah, short to the point. I think that's a key trait that I think students miss out on, whether it's sending us DMs, sending us emails, sending us, it's like just tomes and walls of text.
Yes.
Short, to the point. We don't need your whole backstory. If you get right to your question, then we can ask for the relevant information potentially, and you're much, much more likely to get a response from us, especially if you're just kind of pinging us on social media or sending just a one-off random email through our website. Those walls of text are immediate no's for me.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna look.
And I would say when I say get to the point, what I would do is I would get to the point early in the email. In the first sentence or two, explain what you're doing, and then you can clarify later, in later text. But don't wait until the end of the email to say, and therefore I would come to your school if you made an offer. Say that up front. Get that in the first sentence or two, so that they know exactly what you're communicating.
Yeah.
Easy peasy. And same thing, actually, Courtney, a good opportunity to bring up what we saw yesterday, where there are secondary prompts that potentially don't give you a character count limit. And we saw, as we were reviewing a secondary essay in Application Academy last night, it was a wall of text. What was your response to that?
Too long, didn't read.
TLDR.
Honestly, I mean, when they leave it open-ended like that, you don't want to leave it, just a couple of sentences. It needs to be over a couple of paragraphs. If you have something important to say that is uniquely you and provides information, but when it is pages long and it's just one of the prompts on a secondary, it's questionable, if this person can really edit down, pare it down, if this was the most well thought out choice for how much content. And when you're reviewing thousands and thousands of applications, you look at that and you already just kind of go like this. And it's unfortunate because I'm sure it's very important and it took a tremendous amount of time to put down, but it's a bit daunting when
it's actually interesting because like the amount of time that it took to me is less than it's to me it reads as lazier than giving me a nice, concise, edited, succinct document. There's a saying that I love about kind of preparation in that way, of like a public speaker being offered a speaking slot, and the company or whatever is like, hey, we have a spot for you to speak. It's next week. How much time do you need to prepare? And the speaker's like, well, how long is my spot? If the spot's an hour, I can do that now. If the spot is 10 minutes, I'm going to need a week to prepare for a nice, succinct 10-minute presentation. And I think when we see that wall of text, I immediately go to, you didn't really spend much time on thinking through what you wanted to say. So you said everything.
Just vomit all over the page.
Yeah. I agree with everything you're saying, but I'm going to offer a tip because I also tend to write like that, at least for first drafts. And in fact, I refer to my first draft of things as the puke draft, the vomit draft, right? Just stream of consciousness from brain to typing, right? So what I recommend for anyone listening who's going, oh no, I think that's me sometimes, is go ahead and write that draft. Right. And then start editing. You will feel better if you get it all on paper, but then use your empathy and start thinking about, what does my reader really need? What can I cut? What is the key takeaway that I need them to have? So it's okay if that's a starting point. That's just not your end point.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep.
Andrew asks, for TMDSAS, many schools are using Casper as a pilot program. Do you think they will emphasize Casper scores or take it with a grain of salt? So to me, pilot program, if that's specific language they're using, is they're not using it as a official data point in their admissions process. So they're probably just using it as a data point for later on for research purposes to go, okay, we got our class. They went through first year perfectly fine. We got feedback from all of the preceptors. This one student has some abnormal. They're outside of the bell curve. What was their Casper score? Can we glean any evidence from this? So I wouldn't worry about it other than your normal preparation for Casper.
Yep.
Just a quick plug for MappdCon 2022, MappdCon.com. MappdCon. Dr. Kelly Dorr, one of the co-creators of Casper, will be there speaking. So come prepared for lots of questions about Casper there. Free virtual online event for you. All right.
You can bring the comment back. There you go. Thanks.
Zach, committee letter versus letter packet. Will this make a huge impact? All of my other letters are already in, just waiting to let my postback program know which one I prefer letter-wise. Courtney, what do you think? Any big difference here? Letter packet, committee letter?
Honestly, for our process, no. I've heard kind of all kinds of ranges. I think the biggest thing would be if there is the option for a committee letter and you don't get one and somebody happens to know that you fell without, outside of the range if they know a school. But that's the only thing I can think of that may have an impact. But for this specific circumstance, it doesn't seem like that would necessarily come into play. You just want to make sure you have the right letters submitted. So, and that they're strong is the biggest thing.
Definitely. Good question, Zach. Get those letters in. Jennifer, does speaking multiple language help medical school applications? One, it depends on the school, and two, yeah, probably. Depending on the location. If you're in a very culturally rich area, I know like Tufts Medical School is kind of in Chinatown in Boston, and we have lots of when I was there as an intern, we had lots of Mandarin and Cantonese speaking patients, and so that was an amazing language to have. If you're down in Texas, probably Spanish, or most of the country, Spanish is an amazing extra language to speak. So yeah, definitely. And some medical schools will say on their website that it's preferred. Ashley, what is a good timeline for writing your personal statement? Rachel, what do you think? Is it ever too soon?
Well, I don't think it's ever too soon to ask yourself why medicine, which is the question that the personal statement is answering, right? I think one of the most common things I hear from pre-meds is, well, I don't know why I want to be a doctor because I've just always wanted to be a doctor. Like, no, that's probably not actually true, right? You didn't come out of the womb wanting to be a doctor. So maybe you haven't remembered exactly when that happened or what started, but reflecting on it is good. But in terms of actually sitting down, writing the essay, what I tend to recommend is, Ashley, for your sake, I'm going to assume you're applying in 2023. If you're applying this year, then yeah, you're behind. But assuming you're applying in 23 to start med school in 24, then I would say by January, so after the new year, you need to be starting that personal statement in earnest. And Ryan has a great book. I think, no, I was going to see, you can see it on my book, but you can't. But so here.
No, you can. I can see it. It's right above your head.
But it is. That's
wait, no, wrong one.
Statement.
Sorry, I have too many of them.
Personal statement is not above my head. But so in January of the year you're going to apply, check out Ryan's book, check out some of our videos about personal statements, and start sitting down and diving deep. And then it goes back to what I was just saying before about the puke draft, right? Just lock yourself in a room with Starbucks and type and type and type and type. If you go look at Instagram of some of the big influencers from this year, you'll see a lot of them saying, like, figuring out why I wanted to be a doctor, felt like going to therapy, or like all this stuff came up for me. It doesn't have to be bad, right? It can be good or bad, but like you'll be surprised how tied it is to a lot of your formation. So start thinking about that stuff. And if you're working on it off and on, kind of January through March or April, that puts you in excellent shape to then at some point go, okay, that's, I've worked on it and then I've taken a break and then I came back. And if you do that enough times, kind of January, February, March, April, then you can spend May working on your activities essays, working on pre-entering your application. If you're applying Texas, you essentially do your primaries and your secondaries at the same time. So is it ever too early to write a PS? Yeah, I wouldn't start now if you're 16, unless you're doogie. But most people, I think, start too late. So January is my ideal recommended time.
And it's never too early to start writing down thoughts inside of Mappd app, all of your reflections and stuff in there. So gather those ideas, journal all of your activities that you're doing, your scribing, your MA, EMT experience, all that fun stuff. Freaky fast family history, pre-writing secondaries. Are there multiple essay prompts given per school? Should we tell, quote, news stories that weren't in our personal statement? Scott, what do you think about pre-writing secondaries? What does a general secondary essay look like, or secondary application from?
Yeah, I think they vary so much. There are some medical schools where there's only one prompt. There are others. Duke is one that we talk about, pretty frequently. I also ran into one from Creighton Medical School in Nebraska this week. It had like 10 prompts, and so they can vary from 1,000 characters, 2,000 characters, down to 500 characters or 300 characters, depending on what the question is. So it really does vary pretty considerably between medical schools. The question really with regard to news stories, this comes up, pretty frequently especially when for AMCAS and TMD-SAS, when you're doing the most meaningful essay for one of those character descriptions, one of those extracurricular descriptions. then the question says, well, I talked about this a lot in my personal statement. Now it's one of my most meaningful experiences. I would recommend you can still do that. You can still have that, but I think a new story would be advisable. You don't want to rehash the same thing over and over again. I've even seen it where the same thing comes up on a secondary as well. So here's the third time that it's come up. And if this is an MA experience or an EMT experience, one would think that you would have quite a few stories that you can tell. So I definitely think that that's advisable. You don't want to retell. I actually read one this week where the student had the exact same 2-sentence sequence in 3 different places. And I went back and said, you can say the same thing, but content wise, but you've got to shift it up and really, think a little bit deeper about this and how you want to talk about it. Don't just rehash the same thing.
Yes. Love it. All right. So Cameron asks, is there an advantage to submitting the primary a little bit later so that the verification delay allows more time to pre-write secondaries so they can be turned around faster when they do arrive? It's a very strategic question, and one that I've actually had a conversation with recently. So I'll tackle this one, where a student was submitting their application a little bit later, very recently. And typically what happens right now, just where we're at in the process, and I think TMDSAS is actually a little bit differently, as I learned yesterday talking to a student. It sounds like a lot of the TMDSAS schools wait for verification before they send secondaries, which I wasn't aware of. But there was a student I was talking to who's waiting, still waiting for her essays or her secondary applications from schools. So ACOMAS and AMCAS historically can see post kind of mid-June, can see that you've applied to their school, even if your application is not verified yet, and can potentially start sending you secondaries almost immediately. So you submit on a Monday, on July 1st, let's say, on July 2nd, July 3rd, like you can start getting secondary application requests. And that can get very overwhelming for students, especially if you added 20 schools, 30 schools, whatever it is. And so there's one potential strategy that I would recommend is submit your application, but only submit it to one school so that all of the other schools that you want to apply to aren't going to see that you've applied to them. So you get in line for verification, but you don't get overwhelmed with secondaries immediately. You may get that one secondary request. You can potentially start working on that. Then go back to AMCAS, go back to ACOMAS, whoever, and add 3 more schools as soon as you kind of feel ready and go, okay, I'm working on these 3, and then add 3 more, and then add whatever that number is for you, where you're not going to feel overwhelmed and just want to give up. Because that's what a lot of students unfortunately do, is they'll add 30 schools to their application. They'll get completely inundated with essays, and then they'll just say, screw it, I'm not even going to do all of these essays. So they spent $42 a school to add to their list, and then they're not even spending the time to complete the secondaries because they get completely overwhelmed and burnt out. So submit your application, but only to 1 school or to 3 schools or to 5 schools, whatever you think is reasonable and manageable right now, and then add more schools as you go.
And I would say that advice does not really apply to TMDSAS. I think for TMDSAS, you want to apply everywhere you're going to apply, which I recommend, especially for Texas residents, apply everywhere. Yep. But you want to do it all at the same time. The processing speed of TMDSAS really is so notably different than AMCAS that I think you don't really run into that kind of same problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing, sorry, Veronica, one more minute. The other thing I'll add to that is, so Ryan was sort of speaking to not letting yourself get overwhelmed, which I think is really important. But we talk about pre-write your secondaries so you turn them around within a week or 2, because that's one potential data point that schools are looking at. But the other piece you have to consider is that's a relative data point, like for yourself. But then there's also the data point of how many people applied before you and how early are they starting to give out interviews. So, you can gain this a million ways, but the bottom line is the application is essentially an open book test. And the earlier you do each step of the test, the better your chances. So don't rush, wait till you're ready. But any gaming you're doing in June, July, August is just gaming, right? The way to get ahead is to start long before the application opens. Yep. So just kind of keep that big picture thing in mind, that you could micro strategy all summer long. And I do think what Ryan was saying about, if getting 3 at a time helps you stay ahead in the water, then do that over 30 at a time. But ideally, you knew which 30 schools you were going to pick in May, and you had your primary golden, and you were already pre-reading secondaries then. And if that's not you this year, I'm not shaming you, but for anyone for listening for next year, like, it's more work than you think it is. The primary application is roughly 20 essays, where your secondary is going to be roughly 4 to 5 per school. Let's say you're applying to 20 schools, you're looking at another 80, 100 essays. Like, plan early, space out the work.
Yeah, and a good time to mention, just briefly, to stay tuned. If you don't follow us on email, follow our socials, etc. We're going to have a live secondary essay review day, one-on-one with our advisors. We'll have 2 days over the next 2 weeks, starting next week. So stay tuned for that. If you're still working on your secondaries, you have some doubt over the efficacy of your writing styles with secondary essays, we'll have lots of time for students to work through, and it'll be a live kind of review of your essays, just one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
Kyle asks, what does an osteopathic medical school look for in an applicant that an allopathic school doesn't? Do they prefer people to know about OMM or talk about a holistic approach to medicine? Courtney, I can just picture all of the osteopathic deans and directors of admissions sitting around going, okay, those silly allopathic schools are just completely wrong about who they're looking for, and here's who we want, right? That's what they're doing.
Exactly. I knew this one was coming my way. Can I just say, can we throw out that word holistic? Because
Please.
I've heard it so many thousand times. Please refrain from using that word. We have all seen it. Allopathic and osteopathic both look at their patients holistically and review. They don't, MDs are not just looking at their patients as a symptom. I do, however, think that it is smart, if you are applying to an osteopathic school, to look up the tenets of osteopathic medicine. It's going to be really important. There's potential that you will be asked about them and how you plan to apply them or utilize them in your future practice. So very important. Give yourself the opportunity to research those and really think about, the learning style, how it's going to be taught, how it's going to apply to you as a future physician. But there's not much difference in what we're looking for, to be honest. It's just going to be those additional 200 hours of OMM that you're going to learn, maybe a little bit different teaching philosophy in some aspects, but you go through the same residency and you apply to all of the same practices and specialties. So it's very similar on the front end too.
Yeah. I have often said, and I wonder, like, if the AOA kind of behind closed doors is like, darn it, that Ryan Gray is ruining our secrets. Like, the whole holistic philosophy thing, I think, is the AOA's fault. It's a marketing angle that they've taken, the American Osteopathic Association. It's a marketing angle that they've taken to kind of differentiate themselves. And I don't know if he's still the president, but at the time that I interviewed him on the Premed years, he was the president-elect of the American Osteopathic Association. So big dude, like head honcho at this organization. And I said, look, Bill, I was like, this whole holistic philosophy thing is garbage, right? It's to me, as an allopathic physician, all good physicians treat patients holistically. We look at everything in their life. If they come in with back pain, we don't just go, oh, you have back pain, here's your Percocet, here's your whatever, right? We look at why they had their back pain. Do they have knee pain that's causing their back pain, right? The hip bone's connected to the knee bone. And he's like, Absolutely. 100%. All good physicians treat patients holistically. He said the one thing that potentially we like to focus on from an osteopathic standpoint, or think that we're a little bit potentially better at, is that we introduce a lot of these ideas and philosophies a little bit earlier in the curriculum in the medical education. I'm like, okay, I'll let you have that one. So yes, the whole argument, which is the most common and easiest and just superficial thing that students say, is, I like the holistic philosophy. I'm like, oh God, no, please, like, go deeper. Need more. So good. I'm glad you heard it here, folks. Courtney Lewis, former director of admissions at an osteopathic medical school. Stop using the word holistic. Go deeper. What does that mean to you? Go read the tenets, all of that stuff. Reflect back on it for you as an applicant. Ryan Lee, I'm an upcoming freshman. Welcome. Maybe Ryan would like a free account at Mappd app for Mappd app.
Absolutely.
What would you say about taking prereqs in the summer? This is the myth that will never die. That taking prereqs in the summer is a bad thing, and medical schools don't like it. Scott, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think I agree that this is a long-standing myth that they don't like it, or that it's somehow substandard, or you don't learn as much in the summer as you do in other periods of time, like a full semester, etc. I don't think any of that is necessarily true. Now, the one caveat to that I would say is, sometimes what happens in the summer is that a student is at X university, they go home for the summer, and they are going to take some classes at a local university or a local community college. I think that if at all possible, you want to reserve your prerequisites taken at your home institution, if at all possible. I don't think it's a good idea necessarily to take some of your prerequisites. So, for example, Physics 1 at your university and Physics 2 in the summer at the local community college at home. I think that can, for some medical schools, cause some problems. Not that they wouldn't be acceptable, but it's just not optimal. It goes back to that, my little thing about optimal, acceptable, and not acceptable as the three choices. And I think that while acceptable, they are accredited institutions. They are going to meet the prerequisites. Checking the box. But is it? What message does that send to the admissions committee about what you're doing and why you're doing it, and various questions that could come up. So I think if you're going to take summer classes, take summer classes for some of the elective courses that you have to take, like history or English, or whatever other types of classes that your school might require. Might be a better bet than necessarily taking the prerequisites, especially if it's at a different institution.
Yeah. Where I think potentially the origin of this myth potentially comes from, and yes, right. Some medical schools out there may want all of the prereqs at one college. I don't understand why. Whatever, like that kind of random micro kind of nitpicky stuff just makes me angry. But where potentially this comes from is summer courses are typically accelerated, and so students may struggle taking organic chemistry during a summer versus a normal semester. And they may struggle and get a worse grade. And therefore, yes, it was a bad idea to take it during the summer. But it's not because it was the summer. It's because you got a worse grade than you potentially would have gotten if you took it during a fall or spring.
Right. That's right. Yep.
Right.
I agree with that.
Or goes tough enough in 15 weeks. Can you do it in 6? Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. JB, hello. My pre-med advisor said it's critical. It's critical to have 2 semesters of upper level bio, non-biochem before applying in the 2023. I'm studying for the MCAT fall of 2022 and need that extra time to study. Is this critical? Rachel, schools have prereqs. oftentimes there are quote unquote hidden requirements, hidden curriculum kind of crap out there. What do you think about this critical statement here?
Yeah, that sounds like an advisor opinion that isn't necessarily a med school requisite. So one thing I would say, JB, is if you have a Mappd account, we have a list of all of the prereqs for all of the med schools, so you can enter the courses you've taken and we'll show you your percentage complete compared to those med schools, because it does vary a little school to school. So there are definitely some med schools that recommend upper level bio. Not too many of them require it, although some do. So you can kind of make that assessment based on what the med schools are saying. The other part of it is it critical because your advisor says so, and what are the consequences of not following your advisor? So, you know, my big picture advisor opinion is that stuff shouldn't be micromanaged. Upper level bio is helpful for med school, but you don't have to do it. But if your advisor is saying do it or I won't give you the committee letter, and you feel like you really need that committee letter, then it becomes another question. So critical is subjective. Critical to who? Critical to what?
Yeah. Yeah, I asked that recently to someone posting on Facebook about I forget about postbacks, and the person posted, oh well, from my experience, formal postbacks are better. I'm like, better according to who? For what? Like, I'm like, where's that data from? She said, I don't need data to have an opinion. I'm like, of course not. It's Facebook. I forgot. I'm sorry. Amado. How much does prior service count towards helping you get admitted into the Uniformed Services University? So interesting question. I think you should go listen to an interview that I did with their director of recruitment, kind of their director of admissions role. What's his name? I forget. But go listen to that interview on the pre-med years. It's going to make me mad now. I can't remember his name. It was a great interview. I believe that question came up. And one of the biggest goals for applying to USIS is proving that you want to serve in the military, not I want to get paid to go to medical school, which unfortunately a lot of people are like, ooh, free med school. I'm going to apply to MD, PhD programs, and they don't have any research. So they apply to USIS because they're like, oh, it's free to just click on this, right? I don't know if a lot of people know they don't charge you to add that one to your school list. And so people are like, I get paid to go to med school? Sweet. But their goal is to create military physicians. And so if you have prior service, you already have this experience and this evidence that shows that you have served your country and that you apparently want to keep serving. And so, yeah, I think it helps. Seguil. Aaron Seguil is his name. There you go. Colonel Seguil. Eustace, is it bad to make primary care for rural and minority patients a central focus as to why I want to pursue medicine in my personal statement? Or should I avoid emphasizing a single specialty? So this comes up a lot, Courtney. Our general philosophy has always been the personal statement is why do you want to be a physician, not necessarily what do you want to do as a physician. What are your thoughts here?
I would agree with that. I don't think it's a bad thing to mention where you could, potentially see yourself going and what you want to accomplish with that. But I agree. It's supposed to be what kind of brought you to this point, wrapping up all of, because we have all of the stats, we've got all of your experiences, and this is an opportunity to kind of tie that together and give us a narrative in conjunction with all of this other kind of numerical information that we're getting. And so I don't know if that should necessarily be the focus, since that's not the question, but it can be mentioned. And I don't think, it would be a turnoff for any school, but definitely not the central focus. I agree.
And ideally, right, if Eustace is sitting here going, hey, this is what I'm interested in, their activities are going to show that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's always advice that I would give whenever I was doing any type of coaching session or presentation was, if you say that something drove you to medicine, or you're really passionate about something, or there was a key experience, what does your experience reflect? Did you do anything about it? Was there any action-based evidence that goes along with that? And so, yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up. It's really important. If you're going to say something is a driving force, or you're really passionate about it, and there's no evidence to tie it together to your experience, there's a disconnect there. And we do notice that because they are located very close to each other on that application system. Yeah. And as you're trying to tie things together and get a picture of this applicant with all of the information that they've shared, you can kind of key in on certain disconnects or certain things like that. Yeah.
So let me add just one thing to this conversation, and that is, going back to the spending too much focus on a specific specialty. I think it's a little bit different when we talk about if somebody comes into it and says, I want to be an oncologist and I want to do oncology and that's all I want to do and all of my focus is on oncology, as opposed to primary care. Primary care is broad enough and involves enough specialty choices and there's so much need for primary care that I think that's a little bit different for somebody. Now, whether it's the primary focus or central focus of the application, I agree that I would not go that direction. But I think focusing in on, at some level, why you're interested in primary care as a part of this conversation you're having in the personal statement of this dialogue with yourself, even potentially, of why you want to go into medicine, if that is focused on sort of relationship building and longitudinal care and things like that, as opposed to some other specialty that is really a very focused specialty. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. And a lot of medical schools, one of their missions is primary care focus, which gets a little generic because everyone's like, oh, I'm interested. But if again, as Courtney mentioned, actions speak louder than words. Yes, if your activities support this thing that you're trying to say. But yeah, I think there's a balance between making it a central theme or including something maybe in a conclusion where they're talking about what their goals are.
Correct.
Well, and just to follow up on that, just remember that your personal statement goes out to every school that you've designated. Yeah. Hopefully you have done your research, but you may apply to schools where maybe this isn't necessarily what they're looking for in a school. Maybe you shouldn't apply there. But if you do, just know that you've kind of isolated yourself just by putting that content in your personal statement and not keeping it more general and kind of answering what brought you to this point. And so just remember, sometimes there's prompts for that in secondaries, or there's other opportunities. Just be mindful of the content and know that it's going out to every school that has a different mission, and you want to cover the most bases would be.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, Courtney, because the piece I was going to add sort of dovetails to that, which is you don't need a theme in your personal statement, because the theme is why medicine. And it's not what kind of doctor are you going to be. Right. So feel free to talk about any experiences or passions that are tied to your why medicine, but that's very different than I'm going to skip over why medicine and instead answer this other question about the kind of doctor I'm going to be. So stay on prompt.
Yep.
Jordan asks, non-trad here. Welcome, non-trad. Hoping to apply in the 2023 cycle and still working my day job. I had some clinical experience, around 600 hours, and shadowing around 200 in 2018. Should I prioritize this over completing MCAT/prereqs? So here's the game, Rachel. Let's throw this to you. So the game is, there's a lot of crap you have to do to apply to medical school. And unfortunately, it's not a checkbox where it's like, okay, I got my 600 hours, my 200 hours of shadowing. What's the next thing I have to do? And it's more of this kind of ongoing, the stone always rolling down the hill kind of mentality. What should Jordan do here? Because it's hard for a non-trad, especially if he's working a day job. My assumption is they got bills to pay, unfortunately. Adulting is a miserable part of this process.
Yeah, right. Veronica and I are fighting over the cameras again. There we go. So yeah, Jordan, I mean, my first thought is congratulations. This is a lot you're carrying. So good job and keep it up. It worries me that you have not had clinical or shadowing experience in 4 years, going to be 5 years by the time you apply. So I think you've got to figure out a way to get some, right? And it has been tricky in COVID times because it's been harder to get volunteer work than regular paid work. But of course, regular paid work usually has much more demanding schedules. So, you know, things are opening up a little bit. They come and go. Maybe what you're finding is clinical volunteering where you're just doing a few hours a month. But I think you got to get back in it. I'm saying that over shadowing, they both matter, but honestly, it's usually easier to find shadowing once you have some clinical work because that's where you can meet physicians who might say yes to you. So I would think about the direct patient care experience part first. Should you prioritize this over completing MCAT prerequisites? I don't know how many prerequisites you have left to take. You really only have 2 semesters left, right? You've got fall semester and spring semester. You can continue to take prerequisites in the year that you're applying, but a lot of the prereqs you have to take for med school, you also need to take to do the MCAT well. So you'll have to think strategically about which prereqs could I take in those 2 semesters while I'm applying to med school so that if I get accepted, I have them complete. Physics 2, for example, some of it shows up on the MCAT, but not a lot. And then I also don't have any idea how much MCAT prep you're going to need. Did you take a diagnostic and get a 473, in which case you might need a ton of work? Did you take a diagnostic and get a 505, in which case maybe you don't need as much work? So this is one of those insufficient data questions. I think you need to do a little more deep diving and map this out with the exact details that you have. And then I also think that you need to potentially consider that you're actually applying in the 24 cycle. I'm not saying you have to, I don't know enough. I'm saying this seems like a lot of work to get done, and it's August. So September, October, November, December, January, plus 5 months. So you've got 10 months to get all that stuff done. That's a lot. So map it out. Good luck.
Map it out. No pun intended.
They mapped.
Alec asks, when I review medical school mission statements to determine, quote, fit, most of them seem to be the same. Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Helping underserved next generation of medical professionals, blah, 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 etc. How do I distinguish them? Courtney, when you were helping craft or helping massage, or when you looked at the Burrell's mission statement every year and go, is this still our on brand? Is this still what we want to say? Do you go and look at what every other school is doing and just say, let's just copy theirs because that works? What's going on behind the scenes? Because it's true. I hear this all the time that it's like, oh my gosh, they all sound alike after a while.
No, I mean, honestly, we don't. I think everybody wants to find students that are happy there and that fit that, and, you know, have kind of goals that are aligned with the school. I think that there's a couple of data points that maybe you could look at to know how the school is delivering and kind of figure out what they actually prioritize or value or what is a fit to them. But we don't look at each other and just say, you know, let's be really vague. Let's all say the same thing and confuse everyone. I think we just want, you know, we all know what the deficits are in our country and what we're hoping to help with and put students towards. So I'm not surprised that a lot of them are the same, but we understand that it is kind of hard to do that.
At the end of the day, all of the medical schools there are training to a certain endpoint. And so, and that endpoint is being a good physician out in the community, taking care of patients. And there isn't enough differentiation of what that endpoint looks like to help differentiate a mission statement or a vision statement other than some values and other things. So that's what makes it really hard. And I think students are disappointed with that. And so while looking at mission statements, looking at vision statements, looking at values are important, the better thing to do, again, going back to what we were just saying about kind of the central theme of an application or what a student is saying, is go look at actions versus the words on the website. Go look at news articles. Use Google. Type in a school website. Click on news and see what the school is doing. How are they showing up in their community? What's showing up in the news? If they have a blog, see what they're writing about, what they're talking about. Go to YouTube and see what kind of videos are out there that they're producing, that other people are producing around that. Go on to Instagram, go on to TikTok, to wherever else, Facebook, and search for students potentially that are at the school and see what they're doing. How are they acting as part of that community? Because every student there is a representative of that school. And what are they doing out in the community to show who they are? And that's where students don't like when I say this. Like, building a school list takes a lot of time because you have to do a lot of research. And unfortunately, students just shortcut it and go, what does the MSTAR say with stats? And there's my school list.
Yeah, and I would add one thing to that is, if it's a public institution, you can potentially access their budget. Follow the money, where they spend their money. And if they say primary care is a very important thing for them, yet they're not investing in primary care activities and they're investing in lots of research activities, then that tells you something about what the values are at that school, regardless of what they say.
That's interesting. It may be a fun piece of content to like do that. Pull up. I forget, it's like an S90 or something 90, the nonprofit paperwork that nonprofits have to submit, and look through that and help students understand what they're looking at. We can do that with the AAMC's numbers as well. Right. See what they're doing with their $500 million of net assets or gross assets. Juan asking for a friend, always a friend, is submitting an application for med school in August too late when I have a great GPA, MCAT, and extracurriculars? See, Juan ruined the question. When I have a great, you outed yourself, Juan.
Got to keep those pronouns going.
August. What do you think, Courtney? You potentially have a little bit of a different view because the DO timeline's a little bit skewed from a typical MD timeline.
Yeah, actually, I probably do differ on this one because if somebody does rolling admissions and they do have a lengthier timeline, I know, at least for the school that I was at, our timeline was definitely lengthened. So August would not be considered late for us, but I do know other DO schools that wrap up, interviews by October. And so August would be late for them. And so it goes back to doing your research on schools, looking at their timeline. I know at least for DO schools, the Choose DO Explorer will tell you what the suggested kind of for best consideration timeline is. And so you can reference that because we're pretty transparent there on when we'd like to see applications come in for, because it's not just getting your application in, it's then where are you in queue for screening? And then from there for, review for an interview. And then if interviews are booked up by other people 90 days in advance, then you're there. And then you have to go to a committee, and then you have to go to a dean, and then you have to get an offer. So, just saying August, that's why it does start to get a little bit late. But I would just research the schools and look for the best consideration deadline, because they do differ, at least for DOs, pretty extensively.
Yeah. I love that transparency. I don't think I've seen that as part of the Choose DO Explorer, but transparency, that's how, Courtney, you and I connected at a conference when I was talking about transparency. I think having that transparency from medical school saying, look, I know we have a deadline because we have to have a deadline for when we say we will stop accepting applications, but here's ideally where you should be looking at submitting your application. I think it's very disingenuous and kind of fraudulent almost, if I were to be a little bit extreme, for medical schools that and actually that was part of my presentation at that conference. Was I had my team look at school websites, and I forget the data at this point, but a good chunk of them just don't talk about rolling admissions, what it is, why it's important. And to me, I think that's very deceiving, unfortunately.
And I would just add one thing for Juan, and I would say, Juan, whether or not
for Juan's friend, for Juan's
friend.
I'm
sorry, for Juan's friend. I would say that the only guarantee in the process is if you don't apply, you're not going to get in.
Yep.
So if here we are in August, and for whatever reason you haven't applied yet, yes, it may be a little bit later in the process and stuff, but if you're okay with the idea that it's a little bit later and you may not get in this year and you'll be a reapplicant next year, which is not a disadvantage, necessarily a disadvantage in the process. If you're okay with that, go for it. Especially if, as you said, you've got a strong GPA and MCAT and extracurriculars and stuff. My guess is that there's going to be some schools that will still, be interested in you, even though it's a little bit later in the process. So for those that are planning ahead and stuff, yeah, you want to plan ahead and apply as early as possible. But specifically for you, Juan, I would say, or for your friend, I would say, if you want to go for it and understand the consequences and stuff of what that might mean. But the only guarantee is if you don't apply, you're not going to get in.
Yeah. The very common, what are my chances question. I love the response. It's 0% if you don't apply, and it's more than 0 if you do apply.
Right.
At this point, it's time and money, and the risks, and make it happen.
Okay.
Well, friends, our time has unfortunately come to an end. These sessions fly by, and that's sad. I love hanging out here and answering questions. Yep. So if you like talking with us, asking us questions, but you're a little bit shy, you don't want to use your friend to ask the question, go to MappdCon. Check out our Mappd App Pro service. So Mappd App is almost free for everything. Track your activities, track your GPA, all of that fun stuff. But Mappd App Pro lets you chat with one of us. And so you can enter all of your information, and right inside of the web-based platform, you can start a conversation with us and ask some questions. Use that promo code 30 days free to use Mappd App Pro for free for 30 days. If you like it, you can continue using it. It's $10 a month or $90 a year. With that, I hope everyone has a wonderful, wonderful week. Courtney, Scott, Rachel, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. From all of us here at the Mappd team, thank you for all the students hanging out. We'll see you next week.
Peace.
Bye.
Bye.